Today for Shlema, for Beryl Ben Fega, and Mut Hashem, our learning will help. Okay, welcome back everybody. Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. We're going to try to focus, I think, more on Kedoshim a little bit. I want to talk about the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Eim. I'm sorry?
It's both this week?
It's what? It's Achrei Mot-Kedoshim. You're not a Balkori, I hope. So you'd be in big trouble. It's Thursday.
I was up to speed in
All right. That's very impressive to hear. Okay, keep it up. Okay, so right at the beginning of the Parsha, we have a pasuk, Ish imo v'aviv tirau. A person should fear his mother and father, ve'et shabtotai tishmoru, and should keep Shabbos. Keep my Shabbosim. The Torah, and Rabbi is speaking, right? The Torah is speaking. So, what's the nexus between honor father and mother and keep my Shabbos, right? What is it? Honor father and mother, do tzedakah. Honor father and mother, keep kosher. What is this relationship between Shabbos and Kibud Av V'Eim? Okay, so somehow we're gonna get into that a little bit. Let's see what he says. So this is the Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah, for those of you who've never done a Meshech Chochmah, the Meshech Chochmah was the Rav of Dvinsk in Lita. He's called the Meshech Chochmah because the name of his Sefer on Chumash was the Meshech Chochmah, but he also was known more in the world of Torah as the Or Sameach. He didn't found the yeshiva, right? That's much later, but he wrote his novelette on the Rambam, and Shas is called Or Sameach. It's interesting because he wrote the Meshech Chochmah on the Torah when he was 16 years old, and his father didn't let him publish it because in those days in Lita, in Lithuania, even a balagola, a taxi driver, could write a sefer on Chumash. The scholarship, the level of scholarship in Lita was extraordinary. So his father told me, you wait. When you put out your chidushim on Shas, on the Rambam, then we'll publish and that's what happened. And it's a masterpiece, the Meshech Chochmah. And this is a piece that he has on this question, right? And it's a tiny little bit technical, but I think we'll get through it. And I'm going to give a mashal at the end, which will kind of tie it together make it a little bit easier for me and for you. Yachol afilu amar lo avi v'imo. So right away, Rashi brings this Gemara. Yachol afilu amar lo avi v'imo. You have to honor mother and father. So you might think that even if mother and father tell you, Ish imo v'aviv tirau v'shaptotai tishmaru. And by the way, Rashi says, Kulchem chayavim bichvodi. You're all obligated to honor me, right? You have to honor your mother, you have to honor your father, but every child has to honor me. That's what Shabbos is all about, right? Hadalo psikale misfora kamoleel. So the question he's asking is, why didn't he just simply say, there's maybe a logical idea about these things here. The Amar Gabi Abba, he gives another situational ethic. Abba Amar Hashkeni Mayim. His father says, bring me a cup of tea. Ve'imo Amra Mayim. And his mother says, give me a cup of tea. Sha'ata ve'imecha chayav mikavod. The din is, it's not very politically correct today, but the din is his father comes first because both the wife and the child are obligated to give honor to the husband, father. Now, that, by the way, I have to, say to you very clearly, the Rambam is very clear about the fact that not only does a wife have to honor a husband, but a husband has to honor a wife, even more than himself is the language of the Rambam, okay? But it's from a pure halachic thing here. So there's a logical thing here, we decide logically, you've got a choice, just go to, why not simply say, this is God, you're talking about God. What do you have to make a big deal about? You're both obligated to honor. Dude, just Mishum da Amru b'Yerushalmi Nadarim. So he quotes a Gemara Nadarim. Madua kibud avi ve'imo. He's got a problem. Potchin b'davar shebeino levein aviv. What's he talking about here? Again, I have to fill in the blanks. That's why it's a little bit complicated, but it's really not. We're not supposed to make nadarim. Vows, we don't make vows. It's a dangerous thing to make a vow. We take it very seriously. Because, in fact, if somebody makes a serious neder, it becomes like a 614th mitzvah for him or her, right? Very serious. So we try not to, in fact, you don't hear about nedarim. What you do hear in our regular parlance very often, and we all say it, b'li neder. B'li neder, b'li neder, b'li neder. It's really part of our speech because of this, in our DNA, we're afraid to make a neder. So we say b'li neder. I'm not making it, right? But when someone makes a neder and he has charata, he's sorry, he wants to get out of the neder. Can he get out of the neder? So one way of getting out of the neder is to go to Beit Din. You can go to Beit Din, and Beit Din will examine you, and under certain circumstances, they will cancel the neder. So it's called ticha. They open him up, and they ask him, right? Potchim b'davar shebeino levein aviv ve'imo, right? They say to him, if your mother and father were to know about this, would you be happy about this? You're kind of a Russia making an error. No, that's a terrible thing. I would. They don't know about it, so that's cancel the neder. But the question he's asking is, Yiftachu lo b'koved hamakom. Why isn't the first question, would you do this shebein adam l'makom, right? If you knew that this is not a kavod to the Rabbanu Shalom, right? Why didn't they start with God, right? Why start with the parents, right? Something is afoot here that maybe the honor to parents maybe should come first, right? Okay. So he says, Eze kavod hamakom. What does it mean? It's kavod hamakom. Let's say sukkah shani oseh, right? If a person makes a sukkah, lulav shani notel, I carry a lulav, tefillin shani notein. I put on tefillin. Hainu kavod hamakom, right? Many things that we do for ourselves are really covered for the Rabbanu Shalom, right? So why don't we start with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? It seems like a no-brainer. Why are we starting by the Dorim with parents? So there he says, Mashma l'nafshei mahani. It sounds like, he quotes a pasuk from Eov here. I'm not going to go through it and go to the next line. He says, it seems, Kein hacha, here too. In our case, Kevin da'aviv tzarach le'echol, so he could ask a question. Listen, my father has to eat, and I have a mitzvah to honor him. V'hu amar bisha b'Shabbos. So my father tells me to cook on Shabbos. La'makam lo mahani midi. It doesn't hurt the Rabbanu Shalom if I do it, right? Not if salka daitach. I might think the yaseh ratzon aviv. I should do what my father says, right? Just like by Nedarim, we go to the honor of the parents comes first, then the honor of the Rabbanu Shalom. So maybe here too. I have to feed my father. He asked me to do something. So let me cook. I have to cook. He asked me to cook, make him something. So maybe I have to do it, right? There's no conflict, right? Right? There's no conflict, right? Parshat, he says, no, not so simple. Now, he goes to another problem here. There's a rule of thumb in Torah. We have two kinds of mitzvot, right? We have positive mitzvahs and negative mitzvahs. Mitzvahs aseh and mitzvahs lo aseh. If you're confronted with a mitzvah aseh and a mitzvah lo aseh, which comes first? Aseh docha lo ta'aseh. A positive mitzvah trumps, forgive me for using that verb, I really don't like to use it, but that it trumps the negative commandment, right? Okay. There's a whole discussion though, so here you go. Kibud aveim is a positive mitzvah. Shabbos, dealing with negative mitzvahs, right? Not to be mechal Shabbos, right? It's a serious offense, so maybe you should honor parents for that reason. And then the Gemara again, I'm not going to go through all of the stuff he brings here, but the Gemara talks about what if you have a negative mitzvah that is much more serious. It has a serious consequence, a serious punishment, chorus, shortening one's life, skila, like by Shabbos, stoning, right? And incidentally, the reason why the Torah gives these severe punishments is really, Rav Shamshon for Hirsch writes in a certain place, he says, it's not because the Rebbe wants us to receive these punishments, but to let us know how severe this mitzvah is, how important this mitzvah is to him and to us. So what if you have a negative mitzvah with a very serious consequence, like Shabbos, right? So maybe there's an exception to the rule here, right? Maybe the negative commandment, right, should trump the positive commandment, right? And he brings all kinds of examples here, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but he says here, the third line in the middle, he says, he answers, it's a whole thing in the Gemara, I'm not going to go through, Shiny hacha shekain hechsher mitzvah. But no, the negative mitzvah is really preparatory for the positive mitzvah. What does he mean? He gives an example from the Binyan Beit HaMikdash, okay? Fourth line. V'hinei Binyan Beit HaMikdash is a mitzvah, one of the first three mitzvahs we're supposed to do when we come into Eretz Yisrael, right? Is to build a Beit HaMikdash. Sheyavo b'mheiri yameinu, right? But that's hechsher mitzvah, he says. Even though he says, afal gav, to have a guf mitzvah mitaryeg mitzvot, livnot Beit HaMikdash, even though it is one of the 613 mitzvahs, it is only hechsher mitzvah. Now, in other words, it's all about mikol makom tachlit ha-mitzvah, the purpose of the mitzvah of building the Beit HaMikdash, hi lahakim mishkan, to put up the mishkan, the tabernacle or the Beit HaMikdash, she'akrivu bo korbanot, v'Hashem yireh shama, so that we offer the sacrifices, we daven, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is feared there. We have it creates that. That's the real purpose. So it's hechsher mitzvah. Now, this is not the way Rashi understands this Gemara, but he's quoting really from a Rashba. He might mention another Rishon. So therefore, you might think that now we know that building the Beis HaMikdash, we stop. Building the Beis HaMikdash, Shabbos, the mitzvahs say, trumps Binyan Beis HaMikdash. To the extent, not even that, but we're familiar with the fact that all of the malachas of Shabbos, all the things that we are not allowed to do on Shabbos, are based upon the 39 categories of work in building the Beis HaMikdash. So there's an intrinsic relationship here between Shabbos and Beit HaMikdash. Shabbos is really the positive mitzvah. So you might have thought that, well, maybe it should trump the building the Beis HaMikdash should trump Shabbos. We should be Mechal Shabbos because it's such a, right, we should, right, maybe, okay. So, but it's, Im Kain Tachliso Eino Ke'et HaBin. It's not about the building. Rak Achrei Shu Yeh Banu, when it's built, V'zeh Nikra Hechsher Mitzvah. That's called Hechsher Mitzvah. And now he brings us to cover Kibud Av V'Eim. Kain Ha Dekori LeKavod of Hechsher Mitzvah. Kibud Av V'Eim is also Hachana, Hechsher, preparatory for what? For Kavod HaMakom, for honoring Hashem, right? Inyan muskal mod, and it's just logical, right? Shma mina, dezeh eino mitzuyar b'seichel. Nobody would think for a moment shemitzvah shebein adam lechaveru yidacheh iser divrei Torah, that a mitzvah between man and man should cancel out a mitzvah in the Torah. Ubezeh geter omer. Isura mekamim. I would go, okay. Rak mishum shekavod avi v'imo yesh mashen hogea la'adam l'makom. Honoring mother and father is all about honoring the Rabbanu Shalom, right? Of course, the mitzvah of honoring mother and father. Now, by the way, you know there are certain mitzvahs that do not have a bracha. One of them is honoring mother and father, right? A certain number of positive mitzvahs don't have a bracha, right? Tzedakah. Tzedakah is a very important mitzvah, right? But it doesn't have a bracha. Now, there are many reasons why. The Rashba gives a reason because maybe the person won't take it. If he doesn't take it, it's a bracha levatolo. It's a blessing in vain, right? What about kibud avein? That's another category. A mitzvah sichlit, something that is so logical and obvious, not even before Har Sinai, right? That one should honor his parents, right? So there's no bracha for it, right? It's a mitzvah that could be done even without the Torah, right? So that kibud avein is more than that, is what he's saying here, the Meshech Chochmah. We honor parents because basically they give us are the three basic needs that we have, physical needs: food, shelter, clothing, and love, and affection, and so on, direction. Well, this is the Rabbanu Shalom, Avinu Shebashamayim. So honoring parents is to bring us, because the entire purpose of our involvement in our lives as Jews with Torah, as we've mentioned many times, the end game is having an intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you see that clearly with Kibud Avei. It is to bring us to that realization of the reality of having an intimate relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our Avinu Shebashamayim, right? Isurim are okay? V'zeh hergesh dak shekol mosdot hakabbalah me'Har Sinai. Everything that happened when we received the Torah at Har Sinai, hu hakbalah hane'emana v'notna leMoshe miSinai u'masr. This was given. What was given, we know, at Har Sinai, was given by Moshe to the Bnei Yisrael, u'mesruah dor l'zara machareim, and it was handed over from generation to generation until it came to our generation, from parents to children, right? Parents to children, children to their children, right? V'hodiu banim livnei b'neihem yom asher amdu b'chorev. Remember that the time that we stood on Har Sinai, right? We say at the end of davening in the Siddur, there's a minute to say, it's written there at the end of davening. People sometimes, there's a lot of stuff that many people don't say, but there are the certain sheish zechirot. There are six things in the Torah that you're supposed to remember. One of them is the experience of Har Sinai, right? Again, what he's alluding to is this is also the relationship of parent to child. But it's that relationship, parent have the obligation to give over their children what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avinu Shebashamayim, gave us at Har Sinai. So the two are interrelated. Kibud Aveim and Kibud HaMakom, and Avas Hashem, the mitzvah of Avas Hashem, right? Why there's no mitzvah for Avas Hashem, maybe we'll come to in a minute. Ulechein dor yivaze avi v'yilag l'mosher kabbalah. Az pasak HaTorah b'Yisrael. If we would not do this, if parents would not give over to their children, if there be no relationship between parents and children, right, then that would be the end of Torah, the end of Jewish life. And in fact, we see that the terrible assimilation that we see in certain places in America, for example, is because there's the Jewish education there's a tremendous vacuum here. Ulechein b'zeh hageder yesh b'koved aviv im dvorim hanogim al mitzvah Hashem. So you see this relationship, this nexus between kibud Hashem and kibud, right, and the whole Torah. Lechein sal kedai techaminu lidachi. So therefore, I might think, right? Parents are so important. It leads me to serving Hashem. Maybe I should, Hashem will understand, right? Doesn't work that way. Now, let me give you the mashal, which I think can crystallize this for us. In the army has rules. There are social classes. You have generals, right? And then you have a private, right? So the rules of the army are that a private has to listen to the general. If the general tells you to do something, you have to do what he says. If you don't do it, you're court-martialed. You're out of the army, right? What if the general tells you to do something that's against the rule of the army? The general says you have to do this. It's against the law, but you have to do it, right? You don't have to do it. And not only that, but the general is court-martialed, The general loses his stripes, and he's no longer a general. Now, how does it work in Torah? It's not the same. If a parent tells a child, let's say, be Mechal Shabbos, you know, all kinds of things that we see in our generation, our tshuva generation, the tension that exists between parents, children, when someone is becoming from. So you don't have to, one does not have to listen to a parent when they tell the child not to, to be Mechal Shabbos. However, the parents don't lose their stripes. One is still obligated to honor the parents in every other way. In this particular regard, so it has to be done with sensitivity, it has to be done with love, it has to be done not with chutzpah, and I can't do it, I just can't do it, right? But everything else applies. Father asks you to do this and that and everything else, you have to do this and that and everything else. And a mother and a father, right? So they don't lose. The mitzvah of kibbud avim doesn't go out the window, right? But in this particular regard, right, one does not have to listen. Now, by the way, why is there no mitzvah? There's a mitzvah to love Hashem. Why is there no mitzvah to love children? Why is there no mitzvah to love children? Now, you can say to me, well, it's so natural, right? Well, maybe that's why there's no bracha, but we see that loving parents, loving children is so natural. But let me tell you a thought from Chassidic thought from the Ostrovsky Rebbe, who was an absolute genius. He was a Rav in Poland in the first half of the 20th century. And he said like this, there is a tremendous difference between the love a parent has for a child and the love that a child has for a parent. It's infinitely stronger. Anyone who's a parent and is a parent and a child understands clearly that the love that a parent has for a child is almost an uncommon denominator, the love that a child, where does that come from? This is in our DNA. It's in our DNA. In our DNA, we come from Adam and Chava, right? Adam and Chava were born, right, as what? As parents. They were not born, they did not come into this world as children. There was no mother, father, there was no 9 months, there was no this, there was no, they came into this world as parents. We originally, in our original DNA, are parents, not children. So we don't have to work on, parenting as much as we have to work on loving our children. There's no need for a mitzvah. But we have to work, right, on loving our parents, right? It's a challenge for us, right? And maybe the Rebbe doesn't give it to us as a mitzvah because of the difficulty, right? And I had a mice, I've mentioned this in the past, perhaps not here. I once had a mice, there was a mother and a daughter who were they didn't talk to each other. She moved out of the house, and terrible, as a teenager, it was a terrible situation. Anyway, fast forward, she got married. The wedding was also problems, but she got married, she became pregnant, she had a child. From the hospital bed, when the nurse delivered the baby to her, she broke out in tears and called her mother and asked forgiveness. How could I do this to you? Now I know how I hurt you, how you feel. That's like an hour of being a mother, right? So that's the point. That's the point we're making. Okay, let's go to the next piece over the page. Now this is from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, also on Kibbud Avim. Okay, same pasuk. Ish imo v'aviv tirau. A man should fear mother and father. Should fear the ish imo v'aviv tirau. A person has to fear. There's two mitzvahs, by the way. There's Kibbud Avim, Yiras Avim, and halachically they're very different. There are certain things that we do because of fear. We don't interrupt them. We don't contradict them in public. Kavod is doing things for them. That cup of tea, or at the very least, right, the very minimal, right? So there are all kinds of distinctions, but they're two separate mitzvahs. I want to also talk about the strange relationship in this pasuk. honor father and mother, fear father and mother, and keep my Shabbosim, right? The Ve'emes hamamin be'kadmut ha'olam. If the people who believe in kadmut ha'olam, now he's talking about kadmut ha'olam is evolution, right? People who subscribe to evolution, Kemo Shema Aminim Umot Olam, like many people in the general world, Marishei Yisrael, and unfortunately some lost Jews as well, Shebemeshech Hazman Nitpateach Ha'adam Mikol Minei Kufim. So what really happens after a period of time, you come from monkeys. We come from monkeys, who then become gorillas, or gorillas who become monkeys, who become this, who become that, and eventually they become human beings, right? Kufim v'shar chayot kedom, right? Be'achrei, if that's what one subscribes to, the theory of evolution, shesover shekol masha dorot mitrachkim me'azman hakadmon, that the longer the distance is of the new generation from the old generation, the farther we are away from our grandparents who were monkeys and gorillas, right? Yoter heim mefutachim v'yoter heim chashuvim. So the younger generation has to be honored, right? It's not the older generation, it's the younger generation. Without the theory of evolution, tragically, just to make a social commentary here, this is what's going on in the world today too. I mean, kids are running the roost. There's no discipline. No has become not only is he and she become just taken out of the English language, but no also, right? People are afraid to discipline. We see what's going on in the world, right? This is a world without spiritual values. That's what hurts us so much, right? Anyway, l'chein adarabah. Just the opposite. Heim sovrim shahador hazakan, chayav lekabed es hadoras hatzir. They feel that the new generation, the old generation, has to honor the new generation, right? Aval anu, but we, shema'aminim sha'adam hu yitzir kapav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we who believe that man is created b'tzelem Elokim, the creation God created us, right? Umikol shemitrachkim, from that moment of Adam and Chava, the farther we are, hadorot, the generations yoter, anu mitrachkim me'ashpa elokit. So we're farther away from that intimate relationship of the Ribbono Shel Olam creating us, personally, Kaviyachol creating us, and the Avot, right? Mitrachkim hadorot yoter. Anu mitrachkim, we're so far removed, me'ashpa alukit, from the influence, the spiritual influence of the Ribbono Shel Olam, u'migadluto yitbarach, his greatness, u'bevadai hashuma aleinu lechabed et hador hakodem. We really, asuma aleinu lechabed et hador, we really should be honoring the past generation, right? Shahareim chashuvim u'gdolim yoter mimenu, because they were greater than us. Right? You don't have to be a brain surgeon. You see in a assimilation process with grandparents who were religious, children who started to lose it, and then afterwards, things. So how does he tie this into this question? The relationship between Shabbos and the relationship in parents, right? Hu tzricha lachzor v'lishanot gam et Parshat et Shabtotai tishmor. He has to revisit. The Ribbono Shel Olam has to revisit the creation of the world. He has to revisit the creation of Shabbos. Right? It's connected to honoring parents, to fearing parents. Right? Et Shabtotai tishmoru. Keep my Shabbosim. Dahari haShabbat hu hazecher. Va'ot. Shabbat is the remembrance, the oath, the sign of remembrance, l'chidush ha'olam, of the creation of the world, where it all began. That relationship we had directly with Avinu Shebashamayim, al yidei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, who b'sheshet yemei ma'aseh bereishis, 6 days of creation. So that's the connection here. You have to understand what this is all about. When I tell you to fear mother and father, because you cannot, this generation is nothing compared to the past generations going all the way back to the Ribono Shel Olam himself. Now he's asked a PS here. Be'inyan zeh azkir masha shemati ma'agon Rav Elchanan Wasserman. I want to mention something that I heard from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Rav Elchanan Wasserman was a great Rosh Hashiva, great Gadol in Europe. He was the chief student of the Chafetz Chaim, and he actually was in America when the war broke out. He was here collecting funds for yeshivas in Europe, and they begged him to stay. He went back, and he died al Kiddush Hashem. Whole story about his death and the Kiddush Hashem, but he said like this: She'ilu ra Darwin at a Chafetz Chaim. If Darwin would have seen the face of the Chafetz Chaim, right? The angelic face of the Chafetz Chaim, right? Lo haya omer, he would never have said, Sha'adam nitpateach mikufim ukedoma. He would never have said that man comes from monkeys. He would have torn up his entire thesis. El shehu ra rak anashim kamo. Unfortunately, tragically, Darwin only saw people like Darwin. Ulechein lo bo lidei taut. He came to this terrible mistake about the creation of man. Okay, a word about Rav Moshe. Perhaps we have. Sorry, how are we going with time wise? No, let me go to the third final piece here. Okay, the third piece, page 3, is from Kanfei Yonah, which happens to be my sefer on the Parshat in Hebrew, and but we bring here an interesting thought. We're talking about the Kedushat HaKohen, something about a Kohen, right? The Kahuna is all about, the Parsha is also all about Kahuna this week. So something interesting about Kahuna, okay? HaMishnah Masechet Bechorot Mevia Halacha. There's a Mishnah in Bechorot that brings a halacha Hamatila Dofi U'Memnutam Shel Kol HaKohanim B'Ofen Klali. It kind of casts a shadow on the greatness of a Kohen, right? Kol HaMumin Haroyim Livei Adam Royim LiYisrael Ne'emanim V'Royim Kohanim Ena Ne'emanim. He's talking about a mum, blemish. That if somebody comes to Beit Din and wants to check out, is this a proper blemish? Is the animal not allowed to be used for a korban, right? So if it's a shepherd of regular Jews, you believe him. A shepherd of Kohanim, you don't believe them, right? The Kohen says it's a blemish, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Neman hu al shel chavero ve'eno neman al shel atzmo. No, he's believed for someone else, but not if the Kohen comes himself. He's not believed. So what's going on here? So the Bartanura says the next paragraph: Ro'in Yisrael ne'emanim. Israelite shepherds are believed. Yisrael haroa behemto shel Kohen ne'eman. Even a Israelite shepherd of a Kohen is believed. Lomar al mumin shenaflu behemto shel Kohen, that there's a blemish on this, it cannot be used. Sheme'aleim iru v'yachlu, and it happened by itself. V'yachlu ba'alav haKohen memuman. The Kohen can eat it, right? That's what happens. Let's say a bechor, and that's what we're getting to. A firstborn animal, kedushat bechor, has to be given to a Kohen. It's used for korban, but if it has a blemish, the Kohen can eat it, right? So Kohanim were suspected of making a blemish in the animal, cutting a little cut in the animal so that they could eat it, right? This is what the Gemara tells us, okay? Roim Kohanim, Roim Shem Kohanim, Ein Ne'emanim. So we don't believe a Kohen if he says, Kisharoim Behemtom Shel Yisrael, the Nechshad High Kohen, this Kohen is suspect, Shahu Atzmo Hitil Bomum, that he actually put a blemish, right? The Meimaram are High Roeh, Lo shavik Rabbi, I don't want to go through the whole thing. It's late also. Next paragraph. Hachshadhu. What's the suspicion? Shehakohen yiratzeh lahatil mum b'bechor. The Kohen wanted to put a blemish in the bechor. Shekibel al menat lihipater me'achova lavo la'akrivoto b'veit hamikdash. So he doesn't have to bring it to the base of mikdash. U'b'mokum zot yuchal lahanot ba'ofen miyadi min habechor, and he can eat it, right? By the way, there's a whole shaila today about kedushat bechor or matnat kahuna. There are certain things you have to give to the Kohen from an animal, which still apply today in Eretz Yisrael, which is a big shaila. How do Jewish butchers do it? So I'm not going to go into the halacha, but ideally the Jewish butcher should have a non-Jewish partner, and in the contract he gets the certain parts of the animal that go to the Kohen, right? But okay, now here's this question. What's going on here? Yesh kan tamiyah gedola. How do you, we're suspecting the Kohen? Hayachas b'derech klal kohanim. How do we relate to Kohanim generally? Who? We consider them to be on a much higher level, religiously and spiritually. You know, the only bracha that we have that says be'ahava, I'm doing this mitzvah Hashem with love, is the mitzvah of Birchat Kohanim. When the Kohen blesses the people, he says be'ahava, I am commanded to bless the people with love. Why? Because it's very hard for the Kohen. The Kohen, in idyllic times, he deals with the lowest of people in society. He deals with tzaras, people who are mitzrayim. He deals with all kinds of shilas of people who are not up to muster, right? So he has to be challenged with the fact that he has to do this out of love. He has to love everybody. So you're dealing with a very high level individual. Right? Ubegemora mit patat pamim rabot. Many times the Torah says, the Gemara says, Kohanim zrizim heim. Kohanim zrizim heim. Kohanim are punctilious. They're careful. They're medaktek in the things they do, right? Kilomar, in other words, Kohanim medaktekim b'halachot. They're very careful with halacha, right? Ulefichach. Therefore, ein tzorach lahachmir aleim. So therefore, what's this business b'takanot shonot? So therefore, we don't have to. There's certain things we don't have to have extra rules for a Kohen to be careful about this and careful about that. Shenadu limnoam adham min avera. Keep people away from doing an avera. Right? They're above that. Right? Madua kan. How come here chashudim chazal b'kohanim mefakpafkim b'haimunatam? That here we question their honesty. What's the shot here, right? It's a good question, right? So here's the answer we're suggesting. Let's suggest an answer to this question. B'derech klal, generally speaking, Yehudi emor la'avod al atzmo limanei mikabalat matonot me'achirim. Principally in Judaism, a person should stay away from gifts. Should try to avoid taking gifts from people. Ukefisha omer ha-pasuk b'mishlei. It's a pasuk in Mishlei. Sone matanot yichya. If a person hates gifts, he will live, right? Because really life is about what I can accomplish on my own. Rabbi is giving me call to do something. Not to get a free something from somebody else, right? Sone matanot yichya, right? That's a philosophy of life for us. From Chacham Mikol Adam, from Mishlei, from Proverbs. L'marot sha'anetiyah tivit shel adam u'la'anot mikabalat matorah mecherim. Shlomo Melech is telling, it's very natural. A person likes to have presents, right? I mean, if I would show of hands here, if everyone was honest here, they'd say, yeah, everybody likes to get a present. Everybody likes to feel that they're cared for, right? So, me'achar, from somebody else, ve'einu tzarach litroach avuram, person has to train himself that he's not interested in presents, right? In a general, is a life's philosophy, right? He should be concerned about his own accomplishments, whatever he can accomplish on his own. So how does that answer this question? Very simple. With regard to taking presents, there's a problem, halachic problem for a Kohen. The the Kohen has a handicap. Shekein haTorah mizakeh oto b'matanot rabot. The Torah gives the Kohen an enormous number of gifts by the korbanot. Every day there are korbanot. The Kohanim are getting food. They're getting gifts from people constantly, right? Sherayav haYehudim mechuyavim letetlo. Jewish people have an obligation to give the Kohen these things, and they have to accept them. Umehem alav lehit parnes, and he actually lives from these gifts, from these matnat kuna. Chelik zeh ba'avodato shel Kohen makshe alav mikashe alav la'avod al atzmo l'sarev l'kabel matanot b'ofen koli. Now this is a handicap that makes it very difficult for a Kohen, right, to adhere to this philosophy of life of Sone Matanot Yichya. It's a sort of a chisoron in the Kohen's personality. He's weak in that particular area when it comes to presence, right? Umemele chashu chazal. Therefore, the rabbis are suspicious. They said there's a suspicion here. Shakohanim yiftechu netiyah lahakel me'aleim. They'll take a little bit of a cut in the. It's not doing anything wrong. It's not going to the Beit HaMikdash. It goes to me. I shecht it. I eat it. There's a choice of what happened, right? Gamet ha'ol alechet lahavi et ha'bechorot l'shikavat l'beit. So he doesn't have to go to the Beit HaMikdash. So this kind of handicap makes him sort of suspect in this particular area. So that's why we have this strange halacha in Shulchan Aruch. It's halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Okay? Thank you all for your patience. Mitzvah Hashem next week. Okay.